بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today inshallah we will explain representation in film lecture. Here we have few key ideas. The key ideas for this lecture, firstly we'll introduce Richard Dye's typography of representation, then we will go to definition of a stereotype, then we will illustrate interconnected representation, and finally we will go to Laura Mulvey. We will discuss a mainstream Hollywood film. We will have the concept of male gaze in films and its role. So far in this course we have discussed the construction of moving image in terms of number of elements, and in this lecture we will go to discuss representation, which are the media language, all the media language, and how they are used to represent filmatic word into the audience. We have been discussed earlier the narrative structure, the technical construction like cinematography, sound and editing, and we speak about how these particular elements create genre, and it will create code and convention, and it's sent to the audience to gain an understanding about how film is speaking to us. But the key point here that we should understand is how the film are constructed and how it's present reality to the people and what type of reality is there. Today we will discuss representation in film. Like we discuss modality, the topics here allow us to examine level of macro analysis. We will speak about characters, stories, and how it's help to think about the film and what it represents to the people. To start with, we will go to Richard Dye's typography of representation. Here we have part 1, representation. What is representation? Then we'll speak about who is being representative of what and who is responsible of representation, and then what does the audience think is being represented to them. Representation, as we know, it's a media language that are the convention which are used to present a word to the audience. Here for the representation we discuss more elements that we should use. In representation we have technical codes, narrative code, and generative codes. We have a media language, formal visual codes, media specific code, and moving image codes that are worked together to create a word to the audience. It could be film or anything like that. Here we have an example. For example, we have a romantic comedy which set in New York City. We have there set of technical codes. The technical codes might include continuity editing, cinematography, the soundtrack. This will give us the idea about how can we create the sense of romantic comedy which is related to New York City. What are the technical codes that will help us to create the media language convention to represent a word to the audience? Also, we will have a set of iconography related to New York City as a romantic icon that will be combined to speak to the audience how we can draw a fictional word to the character inside the film. Number 2, being representative of what? We have to represent a social group of people. We will speak about important key element of representation, what we call it stereotype. Here we will represent specific people, for example, specific group of people inside society, and we will represent them in terms of specific purposes. Number 3, who is responsible for the representation? We should examine how the media institution or Hollywood studio or the director, screenwriter influence the representation inside the film. The people who are responsible of this representation, how they have an idea and they want to send it to a people, they will be responsible for the representation that we want to send it. Finally, what does the audience think? We have a specific message, we put it for in a film, people will watch the film and they will have a reading or a feedback. This is very difficult. We have different kind of meaning from audience to audience. There are always more than one possible reading in any particular representation. Now we are moving to stereotype. We have already discussed types and archetypes in relation to narrative structure. Here we will speak about type, which are characters who are defined by what they are represent rather than being genuine individuals. Archetypes here are recurring character type that we are familiar with from the myth. So we have the hero, villain, the femme, tale, and etc. These type of characters are very helpful for the audience. We recognize them and we recognize their role that are played in specific narrative film. They are also general enough to be applicable across culture and over time. Stereotype here, it's a shortcut to a meaning in which have an ordering process. It's also a way of referring to the world. It's our values and belief, which is it's a conscious view. So stereotype are simplification, a shortcut that help us to become impressed in the world of the film in terms of how can we represent specific people in a society. So stereotypes do have their own origin in the real world. They are a key type of representation in a film. They often representation are from the individuals. They are making assumption and simplification about people or group of people they don't know. For example, stereotype that we will have an idea about specific country or a people live in specific country, and we will make generalization for that idea. We will assume that all people have the same ideas or the same belief, and we will promote this thing. And also, of course, here the process of making film, the filmmaker are constantly creating a shortcut of a meaning for our audience, because we need to understand and become involved in the world of the film in the film. Stereotype, it's an important ideological tool. It's help us to make relationship between the society, and we will present certain values or belief that is will have unconscious view about specific people, specific group, and it will be represented in filmatic world. This is a very important concept, because often stereotypes are based on the familiar markers like gender, sexuality, ethnicity, class, nationhood. We can speak about different examples how stereotype play in films today. We can have representation about American people, or representation about Islamic culture in film and how they represent specific societies inside culture. It could be a false idea about specific societies, and the film represent that thing. Here we have an example about the dumb blonde stereotype, which is still very common in Western society. This is both presentation of a woman and a mystification of patriarchal ideology, the idea that men play dominant and active role in society as opposed to women who play passive and subordinated role. This film, a Legally Blonde film, Ellie Woods embodied the stereotype, but also struggles against the prejudice that she faced against those blonde women. She finally won by displaying her his intelligent abilities as well as her beauty. باختصار شديد في الفيلم هذا في ستيريوتايب للبنات الشقراء ذوات الشعر الأشقر إنهم غبيات. هذا ستيريوتايب، هذا غير صحيح. فهذا في عندنا ستيريوتايب يوضح في هذا الفيلم إنه ليس جميع يعني النساء ذوات الشعر الأشقر إنهم غبيات. فهذا الفيلم يوظف دور المرأة إن هي تلعب دور مهم في المجتمع، وإنها قادرة إن إن البنات بذوات الشعر الأشقر ذكيات لهم قدرات معينة. فهذا الفيلم يصحح المفهوم الخاطئ المنتشر في المجتمع. So in order to represent how such beliefs and value are represented to us in terms of representation, if you remember point number 3 and 4 in Richard Dye's biography of representation, we can also think about who produced this text and who are addressing. Here is a male director, writer and crew who have presented us with a film starting by Marilyn Monroe as a typical dumb, blonde or different example. We have a young female writer, director who has produced a film starring a blonde, popular Beverly Hills dueling character as an example of Clueless. We should think about who is being represented and what the audience will think about, how they will interpret the representation here. Here example about Clueless's stereotype for a young female who has produced a film starting as a blonde, popular Beverly Hills character, and there is a specific stereotype over there and how the audience will examine this one. This is an example. Now we'll speak about representation. To summarize the different way on people how we will look at the film, we should remember that film is not reality. It's a constructed and manipulated. How it's constructed and manipulated? We should look at the combination of the technical code, narrative code, performance and ideology. When we discuss how film is constructed, we should think about technical code, narrative, performance and ideology. The most important thing, representation, is in an ideological idea. We have an idea, we want to send it to the audience. We have myth, cultural value, moral principle and convention. The convention could be social convention, cinematic convention and genre convention. So to understand how representation work, we should examine the representation in any particular film. We should speak about the cultural value, moral principle, and we should connect all these to the idea that are represented in any film. Another thing here, how we examine representation. In representation, we have representation in character, the role of gender, role of sexuality, role of class, ethnicity, nationhood. In character, there is many things. How we will examine character. The character are doing action, they have a dialogue, and also we'll see how the character will look like, their appearance, how their makeup, their costume, how this will give us an information. We should focus on gender and how we will illustrate this type of analysis to discuss the role of the character. Another example is gender, the role of men, the role of women. We have a strong stereotype that might be done in this particular point. And that's all here. Here we will speak about Laura Mulvey mainstream Hollywood film, The Male Gaze. We will speak how can we recognize a pattern of representation, for example, stereotype and dominant ideas that are used to reinforce traditional power relations. And we will speak, can we see change over a time? For example, Western society views have changed the way that the representation in a film is changing. Mulvey here, she wrote a key article in 1917s about the gender and the way pleasure is constructed in a film. How pleasure is constructed as in terms of representation, how we represent the ideas. This was a feminist theory on the construction of the film, and particularly its representation of the woman using psychoanalysis. Mulvey here she argued that Hollywood narrative are structured the male gaze in the film. We as the audience are always positioned as a part of the active male gaze, the gaze looking at passive female who are the object of this gaze. هنا بنتكلم عن مثال عن لما نشوف في الفيلم دور الرجل أو المرأة أو كيف أنه يحدق بالنظر إلى شيء معين، كيف هذه فيها representation معين وإيش the object from using this thing. Men here are normal and women are the other. They are objects to be looked at, and this is source of pleasure in narrative in the cinema to the audience. Male are always, or they are played the hero. They are the people who drive the narrative. And a certain cinematic code reinforce this. Narrative is getting the girl at the ends, so the audience also experience this thing. Here, one of the things that help us to construct this idea is the continuity cutting. It's a key role that are played here. There will often be a cutting between the male protagonist who is looking at the woman, then the eye line matched cut to the object of his gaze, the woman who is on a display for him and therefore the audience. Male V here, she argued that this is a fundamental to the construction of Hollywood films. For example, the spectacular of looking at the passive female inbuilt into the structure of the narrative, which mean the technical codes here and etc. Here, as we mentioned before, Mulvey argued that the men in mainstream Hollywood narrative are generally active, they are powerful and dominant. This is an evident in most action films like Die Hard, Mission Impossible, Rambo. Many important films, men are play the most important role. They are the heroes. As we discussed last week, the Western genre is a good starting point for the discussion of representation of masculinity, Muslim people, and the role of men inside the film. The Western and Western film represented as traditionally very strong, men of few words. They are individuals who spurn the woman and here we have two examples about the representation of male in the film. As Malfi argues, the men is in mainstream Hollywood narrative are generally very active, powerful, and dominant. This is an evidence of the most action film like Rambo film and Mission Impossibles, where Tom Cruise they are very dominant, they are very powerful and active, and this is a specific representation about how men represented in Western film, Hollywood film. Here we have Thelma and Louise, an example about traditional representation of the main convention. This film written by a woman and it's directed by a man, Daley Scott. They use a specific convention here. They speak about male character as a rapist and criminals, and then they introduce Thelma and Louise, two women in the film. They are a part of the patriarchal society. Thelma is a housewife and Louise is a low-paid waiters. What happened there? They escape from the particular patriarchal society after Thelma is almost raped and Lois kills the attacker. They are increasingly able to handle themselves, and they show the ability and how women can handle guns very well and they can kill someone, and they are here playing a new representation of the gender and how it changed as we used to as the film used to show us that the women are good in fighting and handling guns and kills. This film show us the opposite, that Thelma and Lois can kill someone and they can work with the guns very well. And you can go to YouTube and you can see a scene from Thelma and Lois. Here are other examples which came from the James Cameron, the director who made many action films with strong female characters. For example, here Terminator 1 and 2, 1 and 2 where Sarah Connor play a very important for a dominant woman. This is how representation of women are changed over the time, how the gender change here, and something very interesting to watch as well. Finally, to summarize the lecture, in this lecture we looked at discussing representation in film. We go to Richard Dye's typography of representation. We speak about what is representation, what is being representative of, and who is responsible of representation, and what the audience think about what is being represented to them. Then we go to stereotype. We define what is stereotype. Then we speak about interconnected representation, and finally we speak about Laura Mulvey, mainstream Hollywood film, The Male Gaze, and we go a few films here. And I hope this lecture clear for you, as it's very important to give you an understanding about ideological basis of genre and the assumption of value and how it's illustrated in film. Thank you very much for your listening. If you have any question, you can write it.